got to see the back of my head there, so it's nice to like just confirm that I'm not like, like prayer, but it's still all there. Yeah.
So everyone's got to turn. So when you lead us, tell everyone to turn.
Me? No.
Yeah, right.
I don't hear anything. Just heads up if y'all are speaking.
It's all brand new.
Yes, I
All
can
right, let's
hear.
call to order with the roll call, Madam Clerk.
Right.
It is on.
Darren Tedford,
Here.
Devin Reese,
Here.
Ed Lawson,
Here.
Bill Thomas,
Here.
Alexis Hill.
Here.
We can hear you.
Can we turn
Hillary
that volume
Sheevy,
Here.
Adam Spear.
Here.
Thank you. We have a
Is there a way to
quorum.
turn that volume up, Bill?
The
Can we turn
question
the
was
volume
about
up?
turning the volume up for those on Zoom, so we'll work on that.
And for the audience. Now I can hear myself. Thank you. Okay, let's do the Pledge of Allegiance. Mr. Reese, will you lead us? The flag's in the back of the room.
Friends, please join me. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. All right, Mr. Thomas, we have some special recognitions.
We do this morning, Mr. Chairman, and we'll start with the APWA award. But I did want to thank everybody and advise everybody this is a brand-new room. This is our first time using it. So as with all things with technology, we're kind of learning our way through this. And so I would share with each of you to turn your mic off when you're done and turn it to red because it kind of messes with those on Zoom. So hopefully this will work smoothly. And let's see, I'll invite up the presenter from APWA.
Thank you. Deanna Gray, Nevada Chapter President of the American Public Works Association. APWA is an international organization of over 600,000 members, and the Nevada chapter recently grew to the second largest chapter in the Western region. Our mission is to promote public works and provide education, training, certification, and networking opportunities for the public works community and our members. We are grateful to the RTC for the long history of support and involvement in the Nevada chapter of APWA. Each year we host a spring conference in the south and a fall conference in the north, and during which agencies and their project teams have the opportunity to compete for a coveted Project of the Year award in one of several categories. We are pleased to present this award to the RTC and its project team for the Sun Valley Boulevard Multimodal Improvement Project Phase 1. Congratulations.
If you want to be in it, maybe just stand behind them. You're good? Okay. All right. And then Bill, can you scoot just a little closer? All right. 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Deanna. Yes, so now I'll invite up Phil Pumphrey from Keolis for the acknowledgement of the Keolis Driver of the Month.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, I'm Phil Pumphrey, General Manager, Keolis. And this month, we'd like to congratulate Georgina Martin. She received her commercial driver's license in a program at Sierra Nevada Job Corps and joined us in 2012. She prides herself on driver safety and takes necessary precautions to make her passengers get to their destination safely. She's punctual and shows up for work every day, ready to make a difference in the community, and has a sense of humor that's very contagious. In her spare time, she enjoys traveling and vacationing with the people she loves, and we appreciate her service to the community and to RTC Ride.
And at this point, I'm not sure who, okay, Gio is going to be presenting on the MTM Driver of the Month.
Good morning. For the record, my name is Gio Jackson, the General Manager for MTM Transit, and our Employee of the Month is Austin Hill. Austin Hill has been a valued employee with MTM Transit since December 2021. He's reliable, punctual, and a safe driver. He's never without a smile when engaging at work. He has no complaints, negative iDrive events, or incidents during the month of January. Austin is an asset to MTM Transit, and as he embodies our mission, value, and our vision that every trip is important. This is Austin Hill.
On behalf of RTC and our customers, thank you, Austin. We appreciate it.
You want to say anything? No, I'm afraid of speaking.
Do you maybe want to come down here for the photo? Yes, sorry.
Madam Clerk, we have public comment. I have 2 cards. Is anyone else in public wishing to speak? Not, move on. Donna Clontz, followed by Matt Grossi. Good morning, Donna.
Commissioners and Mr. Thomas, my name's Donna Clontz. I live here in Washoe County. I'm here for quite a few things today, and I'm going to fit them all into 3 minutes. I want to thank Susie Trinidad and Jim Gee for putting out the one of the changes that's in the item 5.1 today on the changes to routes and to senior services. They let the seniors at our age-friendly Reno meeting know what was being proposed before it came to you, and we gave a bunch of suggestions from the group that was on the call that day, and they took into account what we had to say about the changes to what was called the taxi bucks piece, so that all the seniors now will get that $60 to use as they need to, rather than breaking it up into small pieces. Because every senior that we talked to who uses the program said, this is not going to work very well. It's going to be very, very hard. And so thank you all for listening immediately and taking into account. So that changes in what's being recommended today. And so I'm in favor of the changes in the plans. I live in Northwest Reno. I'm delighted to see the Flex Ride extended to the part of the city that I live in, and I plan to use it. My only issue is with the library that's up the hill, which is now not on a bus route. So I guess folks are going to have to use Flex Ride. So I'm also guessing it's because there weren't a lot of riders who went all the way to the end to get to the library. Because when I go up to that library, I never see anybody standing at the bus stop. So there may not be an issue there. So on the McCarran Loop, item 6.3 study that I found on your agenda today, I read through it. I was one of the people that participated in all the pieces of being able to give public comment. And I'm glad to see that the areas that are going to receive some attention where the Keystone housing, all the apartments and so on hit McCarran, that is going to be an area of attention. Also, where folks get into the lanes to get onto the freeway heading south on McCarran to get on I-80, that is always just a really difficult piece. It was this morning as well, and to have some attention placed there would be wonderful. The last question I had about that is that the McCarran Loop plan doesn't take into account the fact that there's no public transportation on the northeast loop of McCarran. And there are so many people at the end of that piece where Plumas and Lakeside come down, and those folks are in a transportation desert right now. So I was hoping that there would be some kind of recommendation to deal with that. It says in the report that no increased transit is planned, but I'm hoping maybe we could get Flex Ride in there, because there's so many apartment folks up there, and it's growing and growing as more people are starting to live there, and they can't get anywhere if they don't drive. Thank you so much.
You definitely know when your time is up. Matt Grossi. Good morning, Matt.
Good morning. My name is Matt Rossi, a resident of the city of Reno. I couldn't think about a Christmas song today. Part of it was, what a lovely day for a sleigh ride. Jesus. I'm here. I was here last September to address this, and I didn't write a lot of stuff down. I did it all verbally, so I'm doing a change. You have paperwork there with a breakdown of what we're doing, but we're looking for a change in the move of the bus stop on 7th and McCarran over to the other side of the driveway of the going into the shopping center. Really simple. It's not ADA approved. I've personally addressed this before. I've been addressing several of the departments for the RTC, and I'm up to 5. As you see, I broke it down so that you have at least an idea what's going on. I have a map in the back. Less talking and maybe more pictures would be helpful. This bus stop is where it stops right in a right-hand turn lane going into the shopping center. There's 3 designated lanes, 2 off of McCarran, 1 off of 7th Street, that go directly to that lane. When the bus stops, everybody stops. So it's been a real difficult situation. We are asking to have it placed about 60 yards on the other side of the driveway, directly across from a retirement center, where, as I've had other RTC people come out and review it, we've had people crossing right across the street because they don't go up to McCarran and come across. The residents of the Vintage Hill, we had submitted at least a idea of the people would like to be participating in this, and I believe it'll be utilized completely. This is basically what it is. You have the information. I wish you'd address it and see what we can do. The last time it was addressed was one of your departments last September, and I've sent 2 emails to the gentleman and never heard a response back. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll bring it back to the dais. Mr. Thomas, I think we're going to move up item 6.1 and 6.2 to next in the consideration of Mr. Hillerby's time. So let's start with the election of the commissioner representing the city of Sparks to serve as RTC chair for years 23-24, and elect commissioner to serve RTC vice chair for calendar years 23 and 24. Any commissioners have any comments, nominations?
Mr. Chairman, I have a nomination. This is Alexis.
She has a nomination.
I didn't,
Mr. Chairman, do you hear me?
barely.
Oh, goodness. Well, I nominate Ed Lawson to be our chair and Vaughn Hartung to be our vice chair. Thank you.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second,
Got a s-
and discussion.
And go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I am really excited about the 2 people that Ms. Hill has nominated because I think both of you are outstanding representatives for our community. I wanted to ask a question about sort of what I believe is sort of a deficiency in the bylaws. And so for my part, when the city of Reno was chair last and Councilmember Jordan resigned her position, there was an election, I suppose, to fill that role. And I don't think the bylaws spoke to how that would be done. So there's a deficiency, I think, in the bylaws. So I'd like ultimately that to be addressed. I think fundamentally, of course, at the time, the city of Reno, I think, would have appreciated having a representative selected to be chair. But there was also a lot of transition going on in our body. So it's no fault of this body's that the city of Reno, I suppose, didn't move fast enough. But again, I think ultimately my point is to address the deficiency in the bylaws for the future. So just something to think about, and perhaps Mr. Spear can bring it back at some point in time. And ultimately, again, no reflection on the current nominations, but simply a deficiency in the bylaws that I identify.
And just for clarification, Mayor Sheevy asked if I would serve out the final part of that term, as we didn't have people at that time to fill in. So you're right, we should have a more formalized process for that, though. Okay, I got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All right, motion carries unanimously. All right, Mr. Hillerby. Update, discussion, potential direction of staff regarding legislative measures, issues being considered in the 82nd session of the Nevada Legislature.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Hillerby on behalf of Kemper Kroll. And first want to start, as I normally do, with a thank you for the opportunity to represent this organization. It is a great privilege and has been for many years. Appreciate the opportunity to work with your staff on a regular basis. They do an excellent job of reviewing bills, getting answers back quickly to questions, particularly as the session moves along. This has already started off to be a busy session. A legislator pointed out the other day, it's really the first time in 4 years we've gotten back to quote unquote normal. And in that time, we have a lot of new legislators. So things are moving quickly already early in the session. Yesterday, both us and RTC Southern Nevada presented to the Assembly Growth and Infrastructure Committee. I want to acknowledge Paul and all of the staff that helped to prepare the presentation, and Dale really did a great job, both doing the presentation and answering questions for the committee. So I thought that went very, very well. We're tracking quite a number of bills that either have broad impact on local governments and our operations generally. Those are not typically things we get involved with on a first-hand basis because a lot of others, but we do watch those for impacts. And I'll talk about just a handful of bills that we have been involved with and some that you may want to give us some direction upon. One is AB 56. This bill is being brought forward by NDOT. It would allow, create a program that would allow on certain controlled access highways, areas of the shoulder that can be used exclusively for emergency vehicles, and that includes transit buses in that definition. The details of that, where those would be, are all left to NDOT to do through the regulatory process, but in sort of high congestion areas, in cases of emergency evacuations, they described a number of things in the hearing. They would set up some areas and have signage where you would not normally then have the public move to the shoulder if there was a traffic jam or an emergency of other sorts. That shoulder would be available to emergency response vehicles and others, including transit buses. SB 81, which is sponsored by Senator Daley from this area, it would extend a regional planning process that currently is set to expire this year, would extend that process to 2026. The current law requires the counties of Carson, Douglas, Lyons, Story, and Washoe to engage in a regional planning process. This bill would add specific legislative membership to that. Washoe County is sort of taking the lead for this area on talking with Senator Daley and some of the issues with the bill. Adding legislators as sitting members to something like that creates some interesting potential legal challenges and questions about how that works, who's responsible. The bill as it stands doesn't name a lead agency, doesn't talk about who staffs and funds that activity. So again, we're in regular communication with Washoe County staff on as they work on that, and we'll keep you apprised. Assembly Bill 184, sponsored by Assemblyman Howard Watts from Las Vegas, who chairs the Assembly Growth and Infrastructure Committee, would create a clean truck and bus incentive program that would provide, it has identified a certain federal pot of money, and again, we'll be asking the staff here and our federal staff to look into that, see how much money that is and some more about those rules than I know. We'd use that federal money to create a sliding scale by weight of the vehicle on how much would be available as an incentive to a variety of different organizations, including transit agencies. The bill has specific amounts based on each of those targeted weight increments. It would provide an increase in those for certain groups and agencies, so minority-owned businesses, small businesses. It includes a 10% bump in that allocation for transit agencies. We would be eligible for up to 5 incentives per year under the provisions of that bill. One of the things it does require is that the final assembly of those vehicles all happen within the United States. And I don't know the provenance of all of ours, but that might be something we want to be sure we keep an eye on. Increasingly in an international market, we know in some of our other areas, particularly construction, that can become an issue. So hopefully it's not in this case. A couple of bills that there are a lot of people working on and we're keeping an eye on involve homelessness. One from both in the Senate, SB 142 from Senator Harris and SB 155 from Senator Orenshaw. Senator Harris's bill, SB 142, her objective is to make sure that people who are homeless enjoy the same rights as the rest of us. The bill takes sort of a different approach in that it enumerates those rights in a way that, at least from my review, I have not seen them enumerated together in one spot in statute. Things we all think about as rights, but are not necessarily enumerated, about freely using and moving through public spaces, things like that. It also, and what is potentially problematic, includes specifically in that a private right of action for people who feel as though those rights have been aggrieved. It also has some language in there that would say none of this supersedes any state law or local ordinance or regulation. So her design in that is to try to give some comfort that if we do have local ordinances, say on camping or feeding the homeless, whatever, that those would not be impacted by this. I think in the minds of local governments, chambers of commerce, a variety of industries that have weighed in on the bill, the way it's written right now is problematic, so we all continue to work with the senator to see how we can help her accomplish her goals. Clearly, we don't want to see people, whether they are housed or unhoused, treated differently or discriminated against or treated inappropriately. But we also need to think about our obligations to the taxpayers and how do we balance all the rights and interests of all of the citizens that we serve. SB 155 comes at that from a different way, and that's from Senator Orenshaw's bill, and that would ban the passage or enforcement of any local ordinance dealing with issues like resting, camping, giving food to the homeless. That is a much more substantial issue, and those bills and the sponsors at this point have not coordinated on what those would mean. Obviously, if both passed, there would be a challenge because the language in SB 142 that gave some recognition of the local ordinances those ordinances would now be banned and could not be enforced. Mayor Lawson Chair Lawson in a meeting recently, I think wisely pointed out, the state has had very little, if any, role in homelessness, and that has been something you have tackled as elected public officials at the local level. You've done that in a way that reflects the needs of your residents, that tries to reflect the realities of the homeless situation here, which is different than that in Vegas and different than that in Carson City for a host of reasons. And we've tried to point that out. There's a lot of successes and a lot of movement in those areas at the local level. Having sort of the state swoop in and put some high-level rules on that without acknowledging the work that's done here obviously is problematic. So we'll continue to keep an eye on both of those bills, and if there is specific direction from you, obviously we would welcome it. Lastly, a bill that was just introduced, although it's one we have talked about a fair amount, is AB 214. That is sponsored by Assemblywoman Natha Anderson and Senator Skip Daly. That is one that the Teamsters and allied unions have been working on with Assemblywoman Anderson and Senator Daly. Bill does a handful of things. I'll sort of briefly go through those. In existing law, RTCs in a county with a population of over 700,000, i.e. Clark County, are required to have a bus stop bench and transit center advisory committee. Interestingly, the RTC Southern Nevada also has a piece of legislation in SB 17 that would seek to eliminate that provision in statute because they think that's handled in other places for them. AB 214 would not only keep that, it would add a specific membership requirement for members of unions representing bargaining units within RTCs. So they had a specific seat on that committee. The bill has some new language that's fairly extensive on security cameras. If an RTC provides security cameras in its facilities or buses, the new rules would include, among other things, a 90-day retention requirement for the video. It makes that video a public record that can be requested by incident. It requires a 72-hour surrender of that to a request from a bargaining unit representative, again, from a bargaining unit within the RTC, and has some requirements for discipline for any destruction or alteration of that video. The staff is looking at that. That has some potential significant cost. I think the staff's looking at whether current systems can maintain those records for 90 days. How does that work? If you followed over the years the body camera issue within police departments, you know one of the costs is how do you go back and find the video by specific times, staff to do that. And while those become public records, and this bill does not specifically address it, I know from having watched that over the years, one of the issues is the privacy of other people who might be on that video, and are there things you need to redact from the video, and are there costs involved with that? And the bill does not address that, but that is something I know the staff is looking at. That would impact all RTCs, both Southern Nevada and ourselves. Existing law also provides for counties over 700,000, again Clark County, for a turnkey procurement process for high-capacity transit projects. The bill makes a variety of changes to that process. That remains only set up to impact Clark County at this point, populations of over 700,000. It would require one of those turnkey projects for the prevailing bidder to pay the applicable prevailing wage, provide insurance that was equal to that in similar prevailing wage jobs in those job classifications, require the contractor and the agency maintain or participate in a union apprenticeship program. Variety, it's about a 2-page list of requirements. including review of the contractor's ability to perform, any prior issues, some prohibitions on when someone, how long they would be precluded from bidding if they had lost a similar contract. It also requires a public review and a comparison of these turnkey projects versus using employees, and that report would go to NDOT. So we've just gotten that bill, and the staff's taken a review of it. I know Southern Nevada RTC is doing the same thing to determine the impacts, how that might be done, and the costs involved. So I'll stop there and be happy to answer questions.
Questions from the commission? Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First of all, Mr. Hillary, what a joy it is to have you in the stead of the RTC. Your guidance, I think, will be very important. And I know that in Carson, your voice is very well respected. So thank you for serving this body. I know you've served for a number of years, and it is always a joy to work with you. Mr. Nelson and you, I'm sure, will be working very carefully on a number of these bills. I suppose I have a question first for Mr. Thomas, and perhaps because I'm the newer member of the body, it'll show some naivete on my part. I want to understand, when we go down and we utilize your services, Mr. Hillary, and we support or oppose bills, I want to make sure that that direction is coming from this body. In part because, having not been on the body before, I don't know how it has occurred in the past, or to whether and to what extent we would have input in the direction that we seek. So maybe that's the starting point. And then I have some questions about some of the comments that you've made this morning. So can someone help me understand that from a starting point?
Certainly, I can provide what our perspective is today and where we're looking at going forward. And Mike can certainly give you the long-term view, because he's worked with RTC for a while. I do think my observation is that we probably need to strengthen the process to make it clear when the board gets involved. And one of the things I know Chair Lawson has mentioned to me is that we might need a nimble process whereby a subcommittee or a subset of the board gives us authorization, so at least it touches the board. As you're all aware, in the legislature, things can move pretty quick, and we meet once a month, so we would be very much behind the curve if we had to bring positions to the board every time. So that's one of the things we're going to look at, that bringing back to you fairly quickly, hopefully at the next meeting, is some bylaw changes to establish something like that to allow us to get your authorization if we go against it. I would say historically, and Mike can agree or tell me if it's different, we haven't had a lot of direct engagement. This is the first bill I'm aware of that's really aimed, the one we just talked about at the end there, directly at us as RTC. So obviously, I think we're going to want to be involved in that, but definitely want the board to weigh in on whether we should oppose or be neutral. But our plan right now is to make sure, because it does have some potential for significant impacts, that we identify what those are. So at least the legislature will have the facts on what the outcomes could be if this legislation were enacted.
Well, and in fairness, Mr. Thomas, Mr. Lawson and I serve on sort of another body together where we are I'll call it the tip of the spear, because we're on the legislative committee or the subcommittee of the body. Each of the bodies that we serve on have different rules of operating. And I want to just make sure that I'm wearing the hat I'm supposed to be wearing when I'm here, understanding that, I have some questions about some of the things that Mr. Hillary mentioned, right? So I want to start with those, and we'll see where we can get to. The first are the Senator Harris's and Senator Orenshaw's bills regarding homelessness. I don't know whether and to what extent this body would have an opinion or want to weigh in on it. So it would have to be a process of educating me, like, what do you believe is the Transportation Commission's relevance or role in that particular bill? Because in part, I might say to you, I am supportive of elements of Senator Harris's bill, right? And you, I think, graciously characterize the bill, and I think in its best light, which is that everyone wants to ensure that every member of society, whether they be housed or unhoused, has the same attendant rights, right? And I think no one would disagree with that statement. Now, whether or not there's an enforcement provision that we disagree about, but the question again becomes, in what way would I, as an RTC commissioner, want to weigh in on that topic, right? And therefore send you out to lobby or not lobby on behalf of it. I can tell you right now that I am broadly in support of the general concept presented in Senator Harris's bill. I, like you, have some concerns about the enforcement provision where it creates a private right of action. But again, I don't know whether and to what extent my own personal view is relevant to my time as I sit here as an RTC commissioner. So this is something that I'm going to have to wrap my head around. Senator Orenshaw's bill goes a little bit differently, and I might have very specific concerns about the way in which we at the local government are impacted by things that the state does. And there's this whole sort of wonky, government question about Dillon's rule and local control and all of that. And so again, I need to be aware of it, but I don't want to come to find out that our representatives in Carson are opposing bills which we may as a body support, right? And so that's why I am concerned about making sure that there are guardrails. I'll turn now to the last one, and I apologize for the lengthy discussion, and I'm hoping
Start the timer, Madam
Yeah,
Clerk.
exactly. I want to talk very specifically about AB 214, and I think you mentioned this is Assemblymember Natha Anderson and Senator Skip Daly's bill that concerns transportation. Now, this is one where I think it's squarely in our wheelhouse, right? And so I want to make sure that I'm clear that I know that you have done what I asked at the last meeting, which is meet with the Teamsters. My understanding is that meeting's occurring in the first part of March. It sounds like maybe March 3rd. I would have hoped that we would have had that meeting already, but I know that coordinating that many people's schedule happens to take some time. But again, before we go off with our charge, I want to make sure that this body has weighed in on what our charge is, right? Because we may have different opinions on that bill. Maybe I think that there are provisions that are great, some that are not the ones that I am supportive of, but I need to know what they are, and we need to have that discussion. And certainly I want to have that in a transparent and open way in a public process that allows us to come to those conclusions, right? I do not want us to act without some full acknowledgement that this board has directed the activities, especially on a bill that is related to transportation. I know it's harder when everything seems to affect us all, right? And again, I apologize. It is the newness of my time on the body, but I just want to make sure that I don't come to find out, or someone doesn't call me from the halls of the legislature and say, hey, Mr. Hillerby is down here and he's really putting the tough sell on me on this bill, and I don't even know what the bill is or what we've done with it. So again, I'll sort of come back to the body and let my colleagues add input. But you've done a good job of laying the table. Now let us participate fully in that process.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilman. Again, Mike Hillerby for the record. I'll go back to the original question, and broadly speaking, the direction that we have had over the years from this body and from your staff is on key issues like our fuel tax indexing. Protect that. Make sure that we educate legislators as other counties look to do that. In 2013, I believe, when Clark County was pursuing their own fuel tax indexing bill, they went out about it a little differently on ours. Our direction was, Mike, be sure we educate legislators and anyone else involved in that how this works. Make sure you protect the indexing we have and nothing is done, albeit likely inadvertently because they're complicated bills that would impact our bonds and the commitments we've made and the commitment our voters made starting back in 2008 for that. So we've had broad direction there on issues like that to generally sort of look to protect the powers and authorities that RTC has so we can continue to deliver the services to the community that you're tasked with delivering. We have not been front and center on, as you pointed out, Dillon's rule, the idea of home rule and local government powers versus state powers. Those are things we watch. We obviously coordinate and talk to our local government partners, the City of Reno, City of Sparks, Washoe County, and others on those issues. As I mentioned, for example, the homeless bill is one of those. And again, we've not taken any public position. I have met with Senator Harris and wanted to understand better what she wanted to do, explained that some of those things, there might be some challenges with those, that we were reviewing it. Want to be sure that that was not going to, for example, generate unnecessary lawsuits that then involve tax dollars and impact our ability to serve people. But again, have not taken any public position or stated an opposition to that. I will tell you on that bill in particular, there does seem to be an appetite among a lot of the people, local governments and others, and Senator Harris has talked about it. I cannot speak for her and would not presume to. Might we simplify that bill and simply make a very clear statement that people who are homeless do in fact enjoy the same rights and remedies as everyone else, and skip the sort of lengthier version of those things that might be causing confusion and heartburn. So there are ongoing conversations with that. That's not a conversation I've had directly with her on that, but that's that's one, for example, that's one thing that's been talked about that might make that bill a little better in everybody's mind and might satisfy the goals that Senator Harris has. Again, we would, obviously, I know on behalf of the staff, if I may, myself, obviously welcome and look for that direction from you in this body on what you would like us to do. So I hope that helps a little bit. Again, a lot of what we do is going and meeting with legislators, trying to understand what they're wanting to do, explain what impacts that might have on our operation, or in many cases, simply ask questions. What is it you're trying to accomplish? Let us talk to you about what we do and how we do it, and see if something is missing in that, and if we, in a way, we can clarify that again protects our ability to continue to serve the public consistently with our law and the direction of the board.
Mr. Thomas.
If I can, just to accentuate one of the things that Mike said is we don't do anything unilaterally. So our conversations and Mike's conversations start with the 3 local governments. And each of the local governments has their own legislative staff. So we want to make sure that we as RTC, as a subset, if you will, of 3 local governments, are totally in sync with your body's legislative group. And as Mike pointed out, I think the history of this organization is just very generally to focus on our areas. So, for example, in the homeless bill, I would say the thing that we were focused on is there was some specific mention of public transportation there, where we don't take a position on the class. We take a position, or would suggest to you a position on the consequences of behaviors. In other words, behaviors on the buses have a great impact on ridership, drivers' ability to perform, and so we would want to provide that kind of advice or information to the legislature to let them know if a particular action's taken, we believe an outcome could be this, which could have an adverse effect on it. But again, just to go back to the general, our scope is very narrow. We don't get into many spaces. We have Mike and his team, as well as Paul Nelson, our government affairs officer, watching all the bills. But just to stress the third time that it really does, we do coordinate with the local governments.
Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to see you, Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you for representing us in Carson. I concur with Councilman Reese, and I was thinking just since we're bringing this back for changes in bylaws, one of the thoughts that I had that I think works really well for the county commission is we have a subcommittee, it's 2 people, and it's a D and an R, and they meet weekly. And it's typically like a half-hour call, so super quick, and it's not hopefully too much. And that committee kind of helps with direction. And then if there is, if that committee wants to say, okay, I want to bring back to the board a yay or nay, pro or against a certain bill, then that comes back to the board. And that's how we've ensured that we're not wasting the board's time, but then that we can work through bill language, and the board doesn't have to do that at the dais. But we could also, there's many ways we could look at doing that. So, and I concur on AB 214. I bet there's ways, especially after you meet with the Teamsters, that we can find pieces in this legislation that we can agree to. So I'm hoping that we can have that discussion as well. But looking forward to the session. Thanks.
Okay. Well, it's obvious we all think the same, because I've written down here, established legislative committee. I didn't realize till just a couple of days ago that RTC doesn't have a legislative committee. So that will be something we will establish immediately. Every other board I serve on has a legislative committee for the city of Sparks. So yeah, it just makes sense we have one here, as Ms. Hill said, is so you can act more nimbly. And there's questions. I mean, I have a lot of questions on Senator Harris's bill. You know, does that mean that somebody could go into a bus stop and establish that as their domicile, and then we have to start eviction processes? I mean, there's a far-ranging, these questions need to be answered. I agree we can find solutions, but we also need to establish what the issues are too. So that's why I think, I know you're not taking a stance per se, but watching these bills and asking these questions, I think is very, very important for all the local governments, but especially for RTC. And you're right, we're down there playing defense mostly, because not one of those bills that you talked about has a funding mechanism. They put it all on us.
Yeah, thank you again, Mike Hilderby. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. And that's a good point. We do work closely with local governments. I'm on calls and meetings every week and work closely with our colleagues from cities and counties that are there in Carson City. And the unfunded mandate is a regular refrain that the legislators hear from all of us in local government in various capacities. Hey, you want to do this, but this does have an expense and a cost to us, and we just need to educate you about that. Again, that's separate from whether we would and would not typically get up and oppose something, but hey, this is an impact, and we want to spend some time educating you on about it and have you thought about that. So,
Okay.
yeah,
Any other
would
questions?
welcome the direction.
Mr. Chair.
Reese?
Thank you, and I'll try to be brief. I want to just tie up in a bow what my thoughts were. First, by identifying something that Mr. Thomas spoke about, which was behaviors on the bus, right? And perhaps this is an area where the Senator Harris's Homeless Bill of Rights bill has relationship to AB 214, which is Assemblymember Natha Anderson and Senator Daley's bill, because there's this overlapping concern about having video available to ascertain what the behaviors on the bus are. So again, finding commonality is the goal, right? Finding where we can be in agreement. I think this body, I never think about the world in terms of D's or R's, because I think regionally we all try very hard to be rooting for our region, right? So I don't think about it in those terms, but I do think if we can find commonalities, and that is one example. I think to the chair's point about whether or not an unsheltered person would, take up residence in a bus stop, I think that right is not attended to all of us, and so the answer is no. And obviously the law provides that it would not supersede the opportunities of local government to continue to control their policies. And so these are good questions to ask. I want to make sure we're asking them at this dais. And again, our role will be narrowly defined as it relates to transportation policy, as you've said. And my whole goal in initiating this conversation is, and it sounds like we've made some progress, is to make sure that we are aware of it and that the decisions that are made when RTC is opposing or supporting a bill come from this body. So, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Seavey, do you have any questions? I'll take that as a no. Okay. Thanks, Mike.
Great. Thank you very much.
All right, let's move back to the regularly scheduled part of our agenda. Consent items. Anyone wishing to pull a consent item? If not, I'm looking for a motion.
Mr. Chair, I do have a couple of items. I would like to see discussion on 4.4.1.
4.4.1.
And I apologize too to our technical folks. My board iPad now has timed out since I didn't touch it in time. And so now it's asking me for a password and I cannot give it, so I can't. So just know that that's one of the things we got to figure out.
Mine timed out also. What other ones do you want to pull?
That's it.
Okay, so I'm looking for a motion.
I move to approve the consent calendar minus 4.41.
Okay, we got a motion. Have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Okay, 4.4.1, approve a contract with Wood Rogers, Inc. for preliminary design, environmental analysis, and final design services for West 4th Street Safety Project from West McCarran Boulevard to Vine Street in the amount not to exceed $1,057,830. Dale?
Dale Keller, Director of Engineering. Commissioner Reese, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I don't need a staff presentation, but I'm trying to figure out something about well, there's two things. Number one is a number of the items, and I did not pull all of them because I'm supportive of the item, but there are a number of items for which I have two general comments and concerns which I would like to see included in staff reports as we move forward. One is about the timeline for each of the things. So I want to be very clear that what I get more often when people ask me about what's going on here at my time at RTC is they see the good work that we're doing, a project. We'll just pick something in the North Valleys. And so they see the good work, but they don't know the timeline. And so on 4.4.1, the timeline is unclear to me, which is the same for 4.4.2, which I did not pull, 4.5.1. So three different ones, which the question I have is, what is the timeline? So maybe we'll just pause here and say that I want to make sure that the timelines are very explicit. And you might also say, well, Commissioner Reese, we don't always have that. The timelines are aspirational, transportation's wonky and weird, and sometimes we don't know. So I want to make sure that I understand, as to this item, 4.4.1, what is the timeline?
Commissioner Reese, great question, and this is something we can improve our agenda items with. In the contract itself, we do identify a schedule and anticipated timeframes for completing design, in this case for this agenda item. So our notice to proceed, of course, is after the potential board approval today. We're looking that this is a federally funded project. We secured over $13 million of safety funds to improve West 4th Street from West McCarran to West Keystone. So we're excited about this project. So that kicks off we call the environmental process here this summer, and then we'll finalize the final set of plans here in summer of 2024, and then hopefully start construction in 2025.
Well, and again, I don't think it's a deficiency on your staff's report, meaning I'm not criticizing the effort that was put in. It's just that the public wants to see a very specific timing and without having to go to the contract to see it. So that's all I'm suggesting. So the second question I have on 4.4.1 is, and I can't tell from the scope of work, but is undergrounding of the power lines or the overhead lines included? It mentions in the scope of work street lighting, but I'm not seeing something specifically about the overhead lines. And is that something we normally do or do not do, or am I just unawares?
So at this time, we do not anticipate undergrounding the overhead power lines. As we look into the final design, if there are conflicts with NV Energy for the overhead power lines, or as we look to install a street lighting, this is something we consider and find, making sure we're complying to city ordinances about undergrounding utility lines and see if that's a benefit for the project. But right now, we are not anticipating underground power lines.
Okay, and so is that a cost issue that you're identifying with the power lines? Meaning, I would say that anytime we're in the roads and we're hogging out stuff to put whatever we're doing underneath it, that we should be moving towards undergrounding those power lines, right? Because what happens from my perspective is in neighborhoods that are existing, which have had historically overhead lines, you start to have failures of those lines. You have trees that get down during snow events, and then you have transformers getting blown. You have people without power for 5 or 6 days in a difficult time. And so I just want to understand, shouldn't it just be a general rule that we're going to underground when we go in to do the work, or is it something different than that?
Commissioner Reese, there are nuances to that question, and this is a great conversation. We could get more in depth with our board retreat next month,
okay,
and we can talk about the different projects and how we approach utility conflicts, and when do we go from, hey, do we read these, keep them overhead, or should we go and put them underground?
Well, and I appreciate your answer, because I imagine that most of the things that I ask about are more delicate than the question I've asked, and so you just have to rein me in when you have the opportunity to do so. So thank you, I appreciate it. With that in mind, unless anyone has additional questions, I would move to approve.
Okay. Got a motion?
Second.
For second, got a second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, motion carries unanimously. All right, 5.1, conduct a public hearing on potential service fare and fare changes as recommended by the FY 23 through 27 Transit Optimization Plan Strategies document for the RTC Ride, RTC Regional Connector, Flex Ride, and other transportation programs, and approve the recommended service and fare changes.
Good morning, members of the board. That's a mouthful.
Yes, thank you.
For the record, my name is Jim Gee. I'm the Service Plan and Innovation Manager for RTC. And I'm here to discuss the changes in our public transit service beginning this spring. Next slide. Next slide, please. There we go. Thank you. So just as a reminder to this body, these series of changes are phase 2 of a multi-year process that we completed last year called TOPS, Transit Optimization Plan Strategies. And TOPS was a comprehensive, holistic, and ambitious 5-year plan of our transit services. Holistic and comprehensive because it was a deep dive in everything that we do on the public transit side. Our services, our technology, our policies, our standards, and ambitious because ultimately the recommendations in TOPS resulted in changes to 80% of our fixed routes, extensive expansion to our flex rides, changes to internal goals and standards that we have, and additionally changes to our technology and how we present information to our customers. Last year was the first round of changes under TOPS, and those were accomplished last September, and I'm here today to talk about phase 2 of those changes. I'd like to also say that as a part of TOPS, we made it a 5-year plan because, changing routes and impacting everyone's daily lives is a very complex process. And so we want to be very careful in how we present these to our customers. So we're making sure that we're able to continue to serve them. At the same time, in this post-COVID world, we have capacity constraints in terms of the number of drivers. We have constraints in the number of vehicles due to supply chain issues. And so we have to be very strategic in how we roll these services out to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure, and most importantly, not setting our customers up for disappointment. So, next slide, please. First is a series of changes that significantly redesign all of our transit services in Northwest Reno. Route 11, which is our core east-west route on 4th and Prater, will be extended to McCarran and the Walmart there. Route 4 will also be modified slightly with additional services, and Route 3 is proposed to be discontinued. The Route 3 discontinuation is because the frequent, highly used portions of that route will be on Route 11, and the less used portions of that route will now be covered with FlexRide. And Route 11 essentially provides better service than Route 3 in that Route 11 goes later in the evening, early in the morning, and is every half hour instead of every hour. And so from the passenger viewpoint, they see this as a positive change because instead of having a service every hour, they now have a service every half hour. Next slide. We also have a significant redesign of our service in Sparks. Again, Route 11 is being extended to the McCarran and Howard area in Sparks by Iron Horse Shopping Center. Route 21 will be extended to the Northern Nevada Medical Center, and a discontinuation of Route 26. Very similar to Northwest Reno, the 26 portion is being covered by Route 11, which again is more frequent and later service for those customers. What this does with Route 11 is it provides a single seat trip from one side of Reno, where Walmart is on McCarran, to the other side of our region with Sparks and McCarran there, so that passengers can flow through downtown without having to transfer vehicles, which makes the service more attractive to them. Next slide, please. We also have, starting in May, a very significant expansion of our FlexRide services. First is our Somerset Verdi service. On the map is a darker region in blue. That is our existing service that covers Somerset and Verdi. And the light blue region is our expanded area, which will cover a large portion of the northwest section of Reno. That is adding a significant number of people and jobs and provides additional destinations for FlexRide users and also for fixed route users. Next slide. We also are continuing our expansion of our Sparks Spanish Springs FlexRide. The two areas in red are those planned expansions. First is an expansion on the Los Altos area, and secondly is we're filling in the gap between Winco and Spanish Springs and the Spanish Springs Library. So that gap gets filled in, and as we have more capacity in terms of drivers and vehicles, we continually move that Spanish Springs service northward. Next slide. Ultimately, what this results in for FlexRide specifically is an increase of about 30,000 people and about 3,000 jobs that will now have FlexRide service that they don't have before. So we're very excited about that because FlexRide provides that on-demand opportunity for passengers to get to where they need to go without having to work around a transit schedule. Next slide. Additionally, for May, as we do with every time we change schedules, we have a process internally where we look at all the data we receive and use that data to refine our schedules to provide better information to our customers. We have daily schedule or daily information on on-time performance, dwell time at bus stops, running time for routes. We use that to build our schedules from the ground up 3 times a year. And ultimately what that does is improves the on-time performance for our customers, which allows them to have a more reliable service. Additionally, we are proposing a change in our fare policy, which would eliminate an extra fee that passengers pay when they transfer from Jump Around Carson, which is the service in Carson City, to our regional connector to come to Reno. Right now, if they travel from Reno to Carson to get on their service, they don't pay an extra fee, but they've now, on the vice versa trip, pay an extra $3.50. We're proposing to get rid of that $3.50 fee. Next slide. We also are proposing significant changes and improvements to our Washoe Senior Rides programs. First, our Taxi Bucks program and our Uber Rides program, we are increasing the subsidy from $45 a month to $60 a month. Specifically for Taxi Bucks, which is a card-based system, we will auto-load that card with $60 automatically every month, which is a huge improvement for our customers. Right now, they have to travel to one of our transit stations or go online, and they're limited to $45, which we match with $15. We're proposing to eliminate that match and also auto-load the card to save them the trip. As Ms. Kuntz mentioned in her presentation, we had originally proposed incrementing that out over several trips. The feedback from her group, which was very helpful, essentially said that passengers want to be able to manage their own trips, and so we totally agree and are following that recommendation. Next slide. Now, for technology. First of all, debuting this spring will be a partnership with an app called Transit, and that will replace our current app, which is through a company called Umo. Transit is a sort of the national leader in transit apps, and they will integrate with our token transit that we have now for fare payment. They will integrate with our FlexRide system for scheduling, and what that will provide for customers is tracking of the vehicles, planning of the trip, and payment for the trip all in one app. So instead of having to have 3 separate apps to do a bus ride, you can have one app. Additionally, internally, Transit app gives us ability to start having better analytics on our customers, being able to push out surveys to our customers, and also having a Rate My Ride system so we can get more prompt feedback on how well we're doing. The reason we went with Transit is we have already 1,000 local users using that app without any promotion from us at all. And so once we start promoting it and really leveraging the abilities of it, we do expect that usage to increase significantly. Next slide. As a part of that, enabled them, and in order to make that app work, we've had to do a lot of changes to all of our underlying technologies. And so, these systems are listed here on Transit has to Spare Labs token, but getting these integrations to work together and improving all of them has been an ongoing process. So that, for example, if I'm at a bus stop, I can text the bus stop number and receive a prompt message text back that says when my bus will be there. Or if I go online, I can track my vehicle through the website and so on. A lot of underlying improvements which have been approved by this board in previous resolutions, and they're all starting to come together this spring with the launch of the Transit app. Next slide. As part of the public hearing process, we did seek and receive a lot of feedback on these proposed changes. Most of these changes, or nearly all of these changes, were contained in TOPS. And as a part of the TOPS process, we did have 1,800 survey responses back, with a disapproval rating of only 12%, which in the transit world to get only 12% is really, really significant. As I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of strong community support as passengers, once they were educated on the changes and understood, well, okay, I'm losing Route 3, but that's every hour, but I'm gaining Route 11, which is every half hour, they support it. And so there's a little bit of education effort on our part, but our marketing team is very strong in helping us with that. Ultimately, these changes that we propose today will have a net increase of about 1,600 jobs and 22,000 people that will have brand new transit service that don't have transit today. So we're very excited about being able to expand our program and also make sure that we're expanding it in a way that's sustainable and right-sizing for the community. That concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, questions from the commission? Reese.
I think Ms. Hill was jumped ahead of me, but I'll defer.
We'll just put him on the clock.
I don't have any questions, Mr. Gee, but great job. I think your outreach was spectacular, and thank you for working with our seniors and our working public. That's who we really want to serve here. And I'm so excited that we're adopting the transit app. I've used it in other communities, and it is seamless as far as being able to pay, and you can watch your bus coming, which is really exciting as well. I don't know if we were able to do that with the last app, but could you clarify with the transit app that it's ADA accessible?
It is.
Okay.
It is. They are, again, the national leader in this market, and one of their points of emphasis has been ADA accessibility because obviously we carry all kinds, everyone that we can on our services. So,
That's
yes.
great. And then on the microtransit, had we had a combined app for microtransit before, or was it a separate app that we had to use?
So previously, we have a separate app called RTC FlexRide.
Okay.
That would basically allow you to plan and book your FlexRide trip. But to pay for that trip, you had to go to a separate app called Token Transit. And to plan a connection between FlexRide and Fixed Route, which is what a lot of our customers do,
Sure.
that's a third app that you would have to use.
Oh, really fun.
So
So
we're
we put
consolidating.
it all in one in the
Yes.
transit app. Well, that's great, and I think that that will help with our FlexRide usage as well, if people know how to access it. Because I think one of the barriers is that people are scared that they don't know how to use transit, and maybe they don't have the cash or they don't understand how all that works. So I think that this will, I'm hoping, improve ridership. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, let me make sure I'm pronouncing your name correctly.
It's Gee. It's a hard G.
Gee. Okay, Mr. Gee, thank you. The presentation was outstanding and very exciting, the improvements that you're bringing to the region. I want to have sort of a broader question, and this is perhaps something that we will take up during our retreat coming up. But for me, one of the things that I'm always thinking about is the equity involved in transportation. And so that word sometimes is a buzzword, and people use it both for good and for bad. And I want to make sure that I'm clear with you in my conversation with you this morning that I want us to make sure that in every phase of a project, from the initial planning to implementation, that we are thinking away the project affects people across all ages, disability status, races, cultural backgrounds, economic classes. I think certainly it means that, deciding where transportation goes has a huge impact on a neighborhood. It can increase the property values in a neighborhood. It can make one apartment more attractive than another. And so I want to make sure that the lens through which we consider all of these things is one based on equity. And so I suppose my question is, what are we doing in that space? How have we approached what we do from that sort of forefront? Sounds like you did a good job in the outreach of especially addressing some of the needs of our senior committee, but I'm not sure I understand how equity overlays all of the things that you do in your department, and I just want you to be able to speak to that in some way.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. First, in terms of outreach, yes, we do outreach significantly to the senior community, but we do outreach to other communities as well. The old-fashioned model used to be to have a public hearing or a standalone transit presentation, and folks would have to work around their own schedule to come specifically to that meeting. Now, with the ability to have these presentations and information online, pushing it through social media, pushing it through YouTube, so that we can receive comments from the public on their time, so they don't have to make time to come to our meeting, but we're basically creating a mechanism where we can get to them and they can view us when they need to, really has improved our outreach response. In terms of equity, one of the reasons it takes a while to create service changes is because we have a Title VI process that we have to go through. And as a part of that process, we take all of the demographic data that we have, we take the service data that we have, and we overlay those with each other to look at the impact that we're having on our passengers, and specifically to measure whether or not we're having a disproportionate impact on those who are low income, those who are minorities, and so on. And we measure that with every service change. So we want to make sure that we're putting our services where it makes the most sense for ridership, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to make sure that those services that we put out are accessible to everyone as possible.
Well, so I guess my follow-up is, it is your title is long, and so I don't think it includes an equity component, but is it you're the tip of the spear to make sure that equity is forefronted in the transportation services that we provide, or are there other people in the organization for which it is their job, duty, or description to do
So
that?
it falls under our transit planning team, of which I am the manager.
Okay. And so I think Commissioner Hill and I both intend to go to planning conferences this spring related to transportation and the provision of it. And one of the things at both conferences is sort of I don't know if we'll call it a track, but there's obviously breakout sessions and classes that are specifically geared towards making sure that equity is forefronted in transportation processes. So we're going to try to learn what we have to learn to be able to support you, is what I'm ultimately saying. And so I appreciate, the presentation. I want to make sure that we pick this item up perhaps during our retreat so that we can have a more robust discussion about it. But thank you for the presentation. Outstanding work.
Thank you.
Mayor Sheevy, do you have anything?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Gee. Really appreciate it. Can you just tell me, when are we going to launch this?
So the portions of the app are being launched as early as the beginning of March. There are still some under the hood changes that we're making in terms of the data source that will stretch into April. But those will be incremental improvements. The service changes themselves will be launched the first Saturday in May.
Okay, because I would love to see more of a presentation on it, in the sense of walk us through it, so we can kind of see all the different features, what that looks like. I think sort of educating the public, and how do we plan on marketing this and making sure we get this into people's hands? Because I think it's fantastic, and it's probably long overdue, because technology can be so efficient and help people on so many different levels. So what does that look like?
So for notifying the public on the presence of the app, one of the things we're doing is signage in our buses, signage at our stations, But probably most significantly, every bus stop will have a sticker with the Transit app logo. So if I just walk up to the bus stop, I will see Transit app and know that I can basically get on my phone and download that app. Additionally, for outreach, what we've done in the past, especially with our FlexRide app, is we created YouTube videos that would demonstrate how to use the app. So again, someone in the evening or in the morning could pull up this YouTube video, watch that YouTube video, see how the app works, and then figure it out for themselves.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate that. I think we could come up with some engaging ways with TikTokers and things like that to really sort of promote this. I think excellent presentation. I would also like when we launch to make a big deal of it so that we can kind of highlight, you know, the work that it will be able to provide us at RTC. Thanks and great job. I'm so happy and appreciate it, Bill. This is really good work. Thank you.
Do you have something else, Ms. Hill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The mayor just knocked something loose for me. On the promotion of the FlexRide, is there a thought about, this sounds so old school, but a mailer on we are FlexRide's coming to your neighborhood and here's the app and how, I know that could be quite expensive, but even in coordination with Washoe County, because some of this is in unincorporated Washoe County, we could probably help support that effort too. So if there's ways that we can think about engaging new ridership with, the old and the new, that would be great.
Yeah, we have thought about a mailer. What we've done in the past with outreach is we go specifically to senior citizen complexes and groups of people, partially because that's where the riders are, but partially also because, you know, we want to incrementally grow it because of capacity constraints again. So, you know, a mailer is definitely on our list, but I thought our first sort of piece of outreach is going to those residences, group residences where, you know, folks definitely have transportation needs. And, you know, and frankly, a lot of times they don't want to have to call their daughter for a ride, or they don't want to have to, you know, book the senior center van or whatever. They just want to have flexibility and go when they need to go. So that's the market. That's the first market we look for. We also market to our own passengers because a large chunk of our ridership is people who live in Reno but use the fixed route to go to FlexRide, to go to jobs on the urban fringe. And so marketing to our own passengers really helps develop the ridership also.
And I love the idea of TikTok because the we call it microtransit in Tahoe, but the microtransit up in Incline is incredibly popular with folks who can't drive yet. So if there's a way we can reach those kids and get them addicted to transit, especially because they're more resistant to driving, that would be very cool. Thank you.
Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure that something that the mayor and Ms. Hill also indicated is thought about, and all of the things you've talked about are great, stickers and apps. Let us make sure that through that lens of equity and inclusion that we're thinking about people who are impaired, sight impaired, the blind community, people who have mobility issues, because they also have unique reasons to access transportation. And so I just want to make sure that that is being thought about in your outreach. We have an access advisory committee in the city of Reno that helps us to look at the things that we're rolling out through that lens. And so again, as part of it, I would expect that to happen. So it couldn't just be, you know, TikToks. Those are great, but there's a group of people for which that is not accessible. So let us make sure that we're including all of that.
And that is a great point. You know, we talk about apps and booking the FlexRide with just using our phone, but we have about 25% of our FlexRide customers who call in the old-fashioned way. And so we want to make sure that we keep those other methods of contacting and using FlexRide available for everyone.
Well, and I appreciate that many of your notices that go out are in English and Spanish. So, of course, language access is another area. And I think as we continue to move forward as a state, the diversity that is represented by the state is increasing. For example, our AAPI community is one of the largest and fastest growing in our region. And of course, they speak languages like Tagalog and Mandarin, Cantonese, Vietnamese. I mean, there are a lot of languages other than English and Spanish being spoken in the region. So we got to be on top of that, again, through that equity and inclusion lens.
Yep, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Sheevy?
Yeah, thank you so much. Great point, I think, Commissioner Hill, on mailing, because I mean, I still like to see mail, and I think for the demographic too, as well, especially for our seniors. And I love that you focused on people that like to call in, because not everyone is connected to technology, which is something that, you know, we still need to work on all over this, you know, all over this country. Quite honestly, people would be shocked at the lack of broadband in, you know, infrastructure. But the other thing I wanted to ask you, what about, because I think it's really, really important now more than ever, is there a component for micromobility and bicycles in some capacity? What does that look like?
So the transit app has worked with micromobility providers before, such as Bird. Additionally, they also can provide potential pickup times and costs for Uber and Lyft as a comparison, and they've also worked with bike pool providers, or as another example.
Will you be able to put real-time notices? Like, let's say, you know, due to weather, there are delays. Can you do real-time notices?
Yeah, so one of the biggest changes that we're making internally is our data source for our real-time information. And as a part of that process, upgrading that, we are moving towards real-time alerts, so that instead of having to rely on a dispatcher to manually type in an alert, this will be automated through the technology. Those alerts will be sent through the transit app, but also sent through our other means that we use to communicate to our customers, be it email and text and so on.
Great, fantastic. Thank you so much. Great job.
Mr. Thomas, you had something?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. One thing I just want to make the board aware of is part of the TOPS plan was to do a marketing study. And that's been recently provided to us by the consultant that we retained, so we'll be bringing that forward to you either at the retreat or soon after, so you can understand what they recommended and how we might move forward. It's my plan to recommend to you that we invest some money in the marketing of our public transit system in a very strategic way. So everything you said today, we've heard. Everything that is a direction we're going to take under consideration, and we'll bring that back to you so you fully understand what our options are and how best we can decide collectively how best to move forward with our marketing efforts.
Okay. Is that it? All right, this is a public hearing. Anyone in the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the dais. I'm looking for a motion.
Move to approve staff recommendation.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Okay, item 6.3, approve the McCarran Boulevard Study Final Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. Dan Dunges, Director of Planning for the record with RTC. Sorry, I'm not used to sitting down. Michelle, do you want to just cue up the next slide, please? So we're looking today to bring forward to you the final report of the McCarran Boulevard Corridor Study. This has been several months in the making, so we're pleased to be presenting this today. We did bring back in October kind of our preliminary recommendations that came out of the study. Those were also vetted out through the public. We work closely with professional and leadership staff with each of the jurisdictions, as well as NDOT leadership team, to kind of get the thumbs up, the green light to kind of proceed with those recommendations. So I didn't really want to rehash that today unless there are specific questions. We did not have any significant changes to any of those initial recommendations. We did receive about 16 public comments during our public comment period, which was basically for the month of November. Kind of addressed a mixture of bicycle, congestion, lighting and safety, and maintenance topics. And as I mentioned, we worked closely with all of our stakeholders here to kind of finalize that report. Next slide, please. So with that, our next steps are going to be to work with NDOT, assuming approval today, to prioritize, identify funding and prioritize some of these projects. We will be also working with the local jurisdictions when it comes to project implementation. And again, I'm just looking for approval of that final report today. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. I also have with me in the audience today, Chad Anson with the CA Group, who was the consulting firm to help with this report. He was the project manager on that.
Okay. Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you so much to the leadership of RTC for tackling this project with NDOT, and I'm really excited that we are going to invest in this corridor because it's so important to our community. On the pedestrian, the sidewalk, and the bike lane, and then buffered bike lane recommendations, does this fully connect the infrastructure so you could safely ride all the way around McCarran?
That is the general concept. Obviously, we have to kind of work within the context of that surrounding land use. So where possible, we're trying to identify those areas where we can create at least a little bit of buffer space to provide a more comfortable ride for users of those facilities. And so the recommendations in this report kind of call out different solutions to kind of fill those gaps in connectivity. Surprisingly, there is pretty much some sort of bike facility around the whole loop today, with a few exceptions. But on the flip side of that, they're not maybe the most welcoming to maybe not as experienced riders. So what the recommendations report look at is how to improve those to encourage more use of those and to make it a safer facility.
And same thing with the sidewalks as well.
Correct.
Well, that's great. And then on the recommendations on adding additional lanes, could you just explain a little bit on the thought of that? Is that because these corridors are the more heavy industrial, and I like how they called it out in the report, and retail corridors, so there's higher congestion and we're trying to accommodate that?
Yeah. So essentially, there's a few areas where we're looking at recommendations for lane additions. These are really looking at where the majority of congestion is occurring and forecasted to occur. So we did run traffic analysis forecasts through our travel demand model, looking out at our horizon year, which was 2050. So if there's not a problem there in terms of congestion today, it's expected that there likely will be. Some of these areas too, where we're recommending expansion, is really would kind of tie into bookends or where there's already more lanes, and so it would kind of eliminate some of those bottlenecks and you'd have kind of a smoother transition. We looked at a lot of intersection level of service as well, and there's a table in there that kind of goes through all the ways to improve the geometry to improve that throughput at the intersections.
The light timing, yeah.
Yeah, and also with like turn pockets, maybe an extra through lane, that sort of thing as well. On the flip side, there is a section where we're looking at possibly reducing the number of lanes. This is in an area where there is a lot of high pedestrian activity and cycling activity. It's in a fairly dense area where there's a lot of retail. And really, the lanes that are there now are kind of used almost as like an auxiliary or frontage for access management on a lot of those retail centers. So the thought was that they're really lacking any kind of, I guess, comfortable or safe means for pedestrians to get to some of those locations. So the thought is that we would maybe reduce a lane in that section and improve on the bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure there.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Mr. Reese? Green.
Green means go. Okay. First of all, incredible work by everyone. I think really something to be proud of as a region. I think the modal concepts in the transportation plan for this corridor are something that this community has been really asking for decades. So it helps to alleviate congestion, of course. It helps to create opportunities to mitigate safety concerns in the corridor, and also improves the non-motorized facility conditions. So I think that's all excellent. I have two questions. One is related to NDOT. There was a noticeable decrease in snow removal this year by NDOT. And I don't know, does NDOT have a plan to provide adequate level of support for the maintenance for these areas in the future? Like, can you speak to that in any way?
Sure. Without necessarily speaking for NDOT, the district engineering and kind of their front office planning and programming staff reviewed these recommendations and were supportive of that, full knowing that, especially in the term, if you're kind of alluding to like maybe a lane addition, that's going to require, higher level of maintenance activity. And again, I don't want to speak for NDOT. I do know that they've had some staffing challenges as of late, which might reflect of why, we haven't seen as much activity, but that's just speculation on my part, so.
Okay, and my point was not to disparage NDOT. It's just that there was a marked decrease this year, which then fell to the regional partners to pick up the slack. And when it snows, everybody wants to know when is their street being plowed. And this is the important connector street for this community. So I wanted to just sort of highlight that. The second thing was, I wonder what RTC's sort of openness is to funding the maintenance of the multimodal improvements in both the city of Sparks and the city of Reno going forward are. I mean, this is a huge push by both of our cities. It's certainly something that you have been instrumental in helping us to forefront. And so what do we do in that space?
Yeah, again, there's a lot of, I guess, needs here that have been identified. And so really we're looking for that balance. And I know some of my colleagues have mentioned the board retreat coming up, but I think that's going to be a theme that we're going to want to talk about a little bit too, is, how do we balance all the needs of the commuting public, realizing that there are different modes that are more obtainable or preferred for a cross-section of our public. So we're really going to look at NDOT to see where we can prioritize those needs, what funding sources there are. I think, Commissioner Reese, you're familiar with some of the federal funding that we receive. There's kind of different uses of that funding, so different buckets of money, so to speak. So where we can leverage maybe funding that's more geared toward those multimodal improvements, we're certainly going to look at that as an option and maybe save some of our other more flexible funding for some of these vehicle intersection improvements. So kind of looking at a cross-section there.
Well, and I think you're wise to identify various buckets, right? We're all starting to stretch those dollars as far as they can go. And so, of course, anytime you have the opportunity to get a grant or to seek specific dollars from the Department of Transportation, I think those are good things. Ultimately, what I want to make sure happens is that as we create the multimodal improvements together, that also some thought is being had to the maintenance of them, because the ongoing maintenance I think is important. Putting them in without a plan for their maintenance, I think, is sort of dooms us to serial policy failure. And I don't want to see that happen, especially because they are investments, right? They're investments in our both our environmental future as a community, but our economic vitality as well. People want to see those multimodal improvements being made, and there's a high demand for them. So just on the customer customer service side, it's the right thing to do. But from the standpoint of the city, and I'll speak just for the cities here, the maintenance of them is also concerning, right? Because it can't be that we go out and do the thing and it's well received by the community, but then we don't maintain it over time, or that it falls back to the cities to find the budget allocations for their repair and maintenance. So be thinking about that as we undertake some of these very exciting projects.
Absolutely. And if I may just follow up with one more comment. We do understand that it is a kind of a long-term need to maintain these facilities. RTC has provided some funds to our local partners for the purchase of maintenance equipments. Now, that obviously doesn't cover the labor and the time and effort, but these are things that we're going to be looking at going forward, how we can support our local jurisdictions.
Well, and I think you've been a good partner with our planning staff and trying to find those solutions. Continue to have that focus, right? What I am consistently hearing from my folks at the City of Reno is that it's good that it's never been better working with the RTC, right? That the timing is right and well for the kind of, we'll say, renaissance in this area. And I think that's due to the leadership of our executive director and all the staff level concerns that are raised, because what we don't want to get into is old habits or creating silos among our various regional partners. We need to have integrated planning approaches from the top down, and you're doing that. So I just say thank you. I continue to appreciate the openness and transparencies between which the RTC works with our planning staff, and that there's open lines of communication all the time, especially because as we develop different plans, processes, like the street maintenance repairs sort of guidelines, this is a good example. But it's one that's very important and perhaps is not at the surface all the time, but is really the future of roadway improvements. And so continue to do that work. Continue to work with our staff and the other staffs because we're all in it together.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Mayor Sheevy, you have anything?
I do. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this study. It's really, really helpful. And I think, it's a challenging road for many reasons. But one of the questions I wanted to bring up with you, because I didn't see it in the study, is the placement of trees. And was there a conversation at all about, some of the concerns with the placement and the danger that possibly that some of those trees can create? Because I think obviously these trees have grown much bigger, but I've had many constituents reach out to me on some of the placement of trees on McCarran, and it's been really hard to address because it's not our road. Was that at all a topic?
Thank you, Mayor Sheevy. And to be very honest, no, we did not look at that. We were really focused on just the transportation infrastructure. But I do hear what you're saying, and I believe when we get into some of these specific project improvements, we'll be looking at those sort of issues on a project-by-project basis. Certainly in terms of kind of long-term maintenance, I mean, we don't want to put in a nice new facility that maybe there's a known problem with roots that's going to destroy it within a few years. So we'll be looking at some of those solutions as we go forward.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that, because I think we do things really with very good intention, and then to your point, in the long run, they can be problematic, and we don't think of it like that because on the front end, it's a really great thing, and I'm a big supporter of trees. But I also think the placement of trees has to be done the right way. And like I said, I've had some issues with many constituents on some of the tree placings. And as a matter of fact, actually doing into some of the digging, it was done by the HOA. So kind of interesting, like right in the middle of McCarran. So just something that I want to make sure that we're looking at. So I appreciate it. Thank you so much. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? All right, I'm looking for a motion to accept the final report.
So moved.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks, Dan. Reports. Mr. Thomas, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair Lawson. This morning, as I do my director's report, I want to start with both a celebration, but also with great sorrow, an announcement. I'd like to start by congratulating Angela Wright on her well-deserved retirement. Angela is our Director of Administrative Services Department. That includes Human Resources, Information Technology, and Security and Safety. She has been with RTC for more than 15 years. Her last day is March 10th. Angela, on behalf of all the employees, and I think the board, thank you for all you've done for us in the past 15 years. I would like to say on a personal note, she was the first one I really started talking to before I came onto RTC, and she's been a great help to me in understanding the organization and making sure we're moving in the right direction. So thank you so much, Angela. And we have, as is our tradition, a little video to share with everybody. Thank you, Angela. So we move quickly here. We've actually hired Angela as a replacement, and the new director will be introduced to you, all of the board members and the public at the next meeting. And that meeting will be March 17th, St. Patrick's Day. No green beer. You can bring your own, but we won't be providing it. Which will also be the board's annual strategic retreat, which we've talked about on multiple occasions today. I'm also pleased to welcome 3 new employees to our staff. Soledad Alvarez is our new Customer Service Associate in Public Transportation. She started January 23rd. Ian Chamberlain started January 30th as our Facilities Engineer in Public Transportation. And Marquise Williams is our new Senior Technical Planner in the Planning Department. He started February 2nd. So we're very happy, and I believe they're all here, to introduce these great new team members to the board. So thank you all. The RTC is expecting to receive funding from the Economic Recovery Transportation Electrification Plan, otherwise known as ERTEP, grant. NV Energy is awarding the state funds to provide transportation electrification in our state. We applied for a total of $2.3 million, $30,000 of which will fund UNR's feasibility study to examine a unique effort to reuse Second Life batteries from RTC's bus fleet to charge at off-peak times. We think this opportunity will provide additional fast charging options for us. We've also applied to add charging to our 4th Street Station facility, as well as the future Meadowood Mall station that you'll be hearing about in the near future. NV Energy says that funding is available for each of our applications, and we look forward to bringing more information to the board as these projects move forward. St. Patrick's Day is just a few weeks away on March 17th. To help everyone celebrate safely, the RTC will provide free transit service from 4 o'clock in the afternoon to 2 o'clock in the morning. Using public transit can help keep our roads and crosswalks safe for everyone. Thanks to RTC Commissioner Devin Reese, the RTC is also sponsoring uniquely this year a free St. Patrick's Day rides on the pedicab Pineapple Pedicabs in downtown Reno. Pedicabs are bikes that are attached, that have an attached cab for 2 or 3 people to ride along. This will also give people another option to get around downtown and the midtown areas on St. Patrick's Day. Lastly, starting in April, the location of the board's regular monthly meetings will be in our new great room, which we're experiencing today. We're still working out some bugs, particularly with new technologies. You can imagine we have a lot of really cool technology here, but with that technology becomes understanding how to manage it. And as we all know with technology, it's great, but it responds to us, not the other way around. So we have to learn how to use technology, and so we appreciate your patience as we work the bugs out. But we're very glad to put this room to use, and I want to thank our staff members, particularly in the PTO division, and all of the directors in helping get this pulled together, particularly Mark Maloney and his team for giving this great room. And we look forward to many important and successful meetings by the board in this room. So that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you. Now Paul Nelson, Government Affairs.
Good morning, Paul Nelson, Government Affairs Officer for RTC. So unfortunately, you might have heard we were not successful in the grant application for Safe Streets and Roads for All, but the good news is we will get another crack at it. We did hear from the Department of Transportation that we will be getting a debrief on our application possibly next week. So that'll give us some valuable information on maybe some of the things we can improve on our application during the next cycle. The RAISE grant application is due on Tuesday, but we plan on submitting our application this afternoon. We're asking for $25 million to help fund the Lemon Drive project. That'll reconstruct 3.7 miles of Lemon Drive and raise it above the 100-year floodplain of Swan Lake. So that would provide some improved multimodal connectivity as well. The House majority is also making its rules on its congressionally directed spending for fiscal year 24. We don't expect that to have any kind of impact on the projects that we would be applying for. The earmarks process is delayed a little bit, but the ball's starting to get rolling. We actually have a meeting with Senator Rosen's office this morning to discuss some of the projects that we would be applying for. So that would be pretty valuable for us. And as you know, we're also getting $7 million from this same process from a year ago. Thank you.
Now we move on to Darren Tedford.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to join you virtually today. Is my audio okay?
Yes.
Good. Michelle's busy, but getting my presentation out. Thank you. Maybe you could switch on your display settings. Just switch your, there you go. Probably switch screens up on top. I can share it too if necessary. There we go. Thank you. So, if you would go on to the next slide. I'm going to start today's presentation with the state traffic safety slide as we usually do. However, we look forward to modifying this portion of the report in the future as we see the opportunity to touch on the many areas of traffic safety and the efforts NDOT is making statewide. So starting with some good news, when we compare January 2023 to January 2022, there's been an almost 11% decrease in fatal crashes. That's a welcome decrease, which we're looking forward to continuing throughout the year. Ultimately, traffic safety relies on each and every one of us, but NDOT continues to implement systems and programs to increase the overall safety of our roadways. Next slide, please. So here in Washoe County, we saw 2 traffic deaths in January. This is up from 1 last January to 2 this. Both Washoe County traffic deaths last month were pedestrian deaths. We'd like to remind drivers, bicyclists, pedestrians, and motorcycles to share the road in order to make this year safer. Drivers, please watch for and yield to crossing pedestrians and others on the roadway. Also want to encourage pedestrians to wear light-colored clothing or something reflective to increase your chances of being seen. Crossing in designated crosswalks is also important. As a pedestrian, it's important to make eye contact with drivers and watch for them to stop before crossing the road. Next slide, please. So an update on repairs following our winter storms, which we're also having another one today, but here's our update. Our biggest storm impact thus far has been a major landslide, which took place in January on State Route 208 through Wilson Canyon. That's between Smith Valley, Yerington area up towards Topaz. So as a result of cleanup efforts, the highway has been open to single lane traffic during commute hours in the morning and the evening. Here in the Truckee Meadows, we're launching 2 contracts to repair various storm damage. One is going to repair eroded roadside slopes on Holcomb and Lakeside, as well as some on 395 in Kingsbury and Douglas County. None of these are roads that are currently closed or impacting traffic, but they're important repairs for future safety and drainage of the roadway. We began these repairs earlier this month in Douglas County, and they'll continue into Holcomb and Lakeside over the coming months. We're also using an emergency construction contract to repair more than 1,000 feet in about 30 different locations of guardrail across the area, which has been damaged by vehicles in the recent storms. We don't have the staffing levels within our highway maintenance crews to make these repairs ourselves, so we have to contract them out. Most of these repairs will only entail roadside shoulder closures, not major closures of any roadways. Along with the rest of our fellow agencies, we also continue to repair potholes caused by heavy precipitation and freeze-thaw conditions. In January alone, NDOT highway maintenance crews across northwestern Nevada dedicated over 300 hours to pour more than 320 cubic feet of pothole filler to fill potholes created by the precipitation and cold temperatures. Next slide, please. And then you can jump to the next one. Over the coming months, we'll hold some public meetings to keep the community members updated on improvements to highways in the Reno-Sparks area. The first one of those is going to be US 395 North Valley's virtual public meeting. This is for the project which will repave and improve 395 between McCarran and Golden Valley. So if you're not aware of the scope, the portion of the scope will be a new lane constructed in the existing median of the southbound freeway. There will also be additional merge lanes between each freeway ramp in both directions, all the way from Golden Valley to McCarran. That's going to be a huge improvement. And then when you're traveling this route and you're going northbound, you have probably encountered difficult traffic movements between getting on and getting off at Golden Valley. So there's going to be a braided freeway ramp constructed there so that the Golden Valley northbound off ramp doesn't have to curve with traffic coming on at that location. So this is a virtual public meeting to provide this information. It's currently open and it will be open through March 7th. And to visit, to see the exhibits and to leave comments, we encourage you to visit the website. It's 395northvalleys.com. Another public meeting that we are hosting is to bring information to the public about the next phase of the Pyramid Highway widening. This is our pyramid from Queenway to Los Altos and Los Altos to Golden View that we've been discussing for many months, obviously developed in participation with the RTC, including grant funding that we seem to talk a lot about recently. So widening from Queenway to Los Altos, and then redoing the roadway from Los Altos to Golden View. Also something that was mentioned, adding some multimodal, including a 10-foot wide shared use path and 5-foot bike lanes. Other improvements include improved traffic signals, expanded sidewalks, shared use path, sound walls, and enhancing the drainage that's out there. So that contract will hopefully be awarded by our transportation board on Monday. But currently you might see the work going on out there that is utility relocation work that's underway in advance of the official contract starting. So we will be sending out notifications either through that website or through public notice for the future public meetings on this project, but they will be held in March and April to keep the community aware of the schedule and the scope and what the general plan is. Next slide, please. So that concludes my report. I'm happy to answer questions. I wrote down some notes on a couple of questions that were already asked. Commissioner Reese asked about snow removal. So definitely staff vacancies, which we believe are related to pay, are the main challenge with snow removal. And the link there is we're more than 50% vacant on most of our maintenance crews in the Reno-Sparks area. This is the challenge of we have snow plows sitting in the yard because we don't have snow plow drivers. It's a huge challenge for us, not just in this area, but statewide. Because of that, and we've been anticipating, it hasn't happened. It happened a little bit last winter. It's happening more this winter, but we have to come out and prioritize how we're going to plow the roads with limited staff. And that prioritization is roughly, we're going to clear the interstates, then we're going to clear arterials such as McCarran, and then we're going to go on to our lower volume roads. That would be the main reason why you would see snow removal that was maybe not what you were accustomed to in previous years, is our lack of team members to go out and drive the snow plows and clear the road. Second question about maintenance of multimodal facilities. We've been looking into this challenge as we add the same multimodal facilities that we're going to add on Pyramid, we're going to add on Mount Rose. Is you can't drive a snowplow down those facilities, and you can't drive a sweeper down those facilities. So we've been discussing those challenges. Our options that we're considering are working with local agencies that maybe have that capacity or have the right equipment because of smaller facilities that already exist, or contracting out the work to make sure that we're both removing snow and sweeping in the summertime. That is all I have. I'm happy to answer any more questions.
Questions from the commission? Mayor Sheedy?
No, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Darren.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to commissioner announcements. I'm going to start off though. Adam, how do we get a legislative committee set up in the fastest amount of time?
I believe we'd have to look at it and do a little bit of research, probably hold a special meeting if board action was required. We'd have to look into some of the other examples of different entities and how they've done it. There could be open meeting law issues to consider. And so I think it would just be a matter of committing to it and doing that work as quickly as possible and then holding a special meeting.
I think obviously the county commission has already the program to work off of. So plagiarism is a sincere form of flattery.
Agreed.
We can plagiarize their system, but I think it's something we needed to get done in a hurry, just so that we can have that input for Mike, and then anything that we're going to actually take a public stance on that we can bring back to the board and call a special meeting of the board if we need to. But yeah, that for me, like I said, my fault for not realizing we didn't have a legislative committee until just a couple of days ago. Anyone else? Mr. Reese? Ms. Hill?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you so much. I was able to go to the NACO conference in DC and learned about many of these transportation grant opportunities that local governments can apply for instead of going straight to the state, which has traditionally been how we receive transportation opportunities. And so there are planning grants for corridors that are unsafe because the transportation mindset is zero fatalities, which we're already doing at RTC, which is great. And then once you do the planning, you can actually get federal dollars for execution. And RTC is so good at applying for these federal grants that I was hoping at our retreat, which sounds like the agenda is like a 3-day agenda at this point, if we could talk about how RTC can help our local agencies on the, prioritizing corridors that we know are unsafe and applying for these dollars because they're just at least at Washoe County, we just don't have the staff. And I'm wondering if there's collaborations like what RTC is doing with NDOT that perhaps we could look at doing on the local side. I know your staff are slammed, so I just am so excited and I don't want to lose the opportunity to do this work. The other thing is March 9th in Incline Village at the Parasol Building, we are having a transportation roundtable, and this is for the Incline Village and Crystal Bay community and Placer County, our travel agency up in Incline Village, RTC and TTD and Washoe County are all participating, and I just wanted to say thank you to RTC for your commitment of continuing to reach out to Incline Village and Crystal Bay. That's great. I'm really excited about this roundtable. It will start at noon that day, and I was wondering if we could look at perhaps starting our meetings selfishly at 10 a.m. or 9:30. I don't have childcare until 9. That's why I come late. I just wanted to get that out on the record. It's not because I just woke up. And is there a way that we can ensure that our public commenters are addressed if they haven't been? I just wanted to make sure staff is talking to them, the folks that chatted with us this morning. And then I just commend RTC on this gorgeous room. I am jealous. It is like, I think it's the most beautiful meeting room in the region. So I'm very excited to have meetings here. So thank you so much.
Okay, Mr. Reese, you got anything? Okay, well, then we'll move on to public comment. Mac Rossi?
Mr.
Oh, Ms.
Chair.
Shuby, go ahead.
Thank you so much. A couple of things, I think to your point, you bring up a great point that I wanted to touch on. And you said some subcommittees, and then also I would love to see, we can obviously dive into this during the retreat, but what subcommittees do we have at RTC? Because I don't know that. Or putting in some advisory boards in place. And then the other thing that I would request from a director's update, which would be great, as we move forward, something on micromobility and bicycling projects that we're doing, things that we're sort of looking at to the future of micromobility and bicycles.
Okay. You got that, Mr. Thomas?
I got it.
Perfect.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Now we'll move on to public comment then. Mr. Mac Rossi.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity for another moment. Mac Rossi for the record. On the McCarran, about almost 10 years ago, when I was on the Neighborhood Advisory Board, the development came up between Keystone and Leadership Way coming into McCarran. At that time, it was only 200 apartment complex and going on, and they seemed to slide by on doing any kind of traffic control getting onto McCarran. If you wanted to get on McCarran, you could only make a right-hand turn, and then you had to get your vehicle over to the left, and you had 2 opportunities to make a U-turn to go in the opposite direction. That was almost 8, 9, 10 years ago, and since then, it came up and another development came in there and they added another 300 apartment complex and same complex. Nobody seemed to be concerned with the traffic. About 3 years ago, I addressed it again and NDOT said they were possibly going to put a roundabout in there. You had a survey come in on the McCarran and it wasn't highlighted, that area at all. Keep in mind, there's also a trailhead up in that area. Since then, NDOT has talked about putting in a traffic light. My concern is, I just don't want to see it go to the wayside. This has been pending for quite a while, and within this summer, there will now be 800 apartments coming out onto McCarran that can only make a right-hand turn. Thank you.
Thanks, Mac. Anyone else in the public wishing to speak at this time? Seeing none, we'll bring it back and we'll go to my favorite item, adjournment.